Hello, my name is Katie Bode-Lang, and I'm the Director of Education and Quality Management in the Office for Research Protections. This is a recording of the presentation given on January 16th, 2018. And today I'm going to give you a brief overview of the NIH's definition of a clinical trial. We've been talking about this definition since last January when NIH began requiring that all funded clinical trials have good clinical practice or GCP training, and that they register and report results in clinicaltrials.gov. We're talking about this again today because starting January 25th, you need to correctly pick a clinical trial specific funding opportunity announcement from NIH if your study meets NIH's definition of a clinical trial. So NIH's definition of a clinical trial is broad, and it can include basic science and it includes social, behavioral, educational research. Everyone's been talking about how NIH's definition of a clinical trial is a complete shift in what we consider to be a clinical trial. But it's getting real now. If you don't correctly identify your work as a clinical trial, you will not even be reviewed. You have to apply to the correct FOA. And the quality management team in the Office for Research Protections is here to help you determine whether or not you meet the definition of a clinical trial by NIH's standards. At the College of Medicine, the Research Quality Assurance Office can help you. So what I'm going to tell you today, you might not like. You might not agree with NIH's definition of a clinical trial. We are not necessarily advocates of NIH's definition either, but we're here to help you get funded, and that means following NIH's definition, whether you agree with it or not. So on their website, NIH has 4 questions for you to answer to determine whether or not they consider your research a clinical trial. The first, does the study involve human participants? Second, are the participants prospectively assigned to an intervention? Third, is the study designed to evaluate the effect of the intervention on the participants? And fourth, is the effect that will be evaluated a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome? Let's break this one down. So question number 1, does the study involve human participants? We can get this one right, all right? So you're working with living people, doesn't matter if they're healthy or not. That is one thing we want to clarify. It includes healthy participants. Studies that involve secondary research with biological specimens or health information are not considered clinical trials. So you don't have to go through this exercise any further if that's the case for you. Question number 2, are the participants prospectively assigned to an intervention? All right, prospective literally means expected or in the future. So that means you're not retroactively looking at what someone did, you're asking people to participate in something. This has nothing to do with randomization, it has nothing to do with control groups. If you're asking someone to do something, you've just prospectively assigned them. On the flip side, if you're looking at records from the past or you're just observing people, you're not prospectively assigning them. Now, an intervention, that's a manipulation of the subject or the subject's environment per NIH's definition. And this can be what might traditionally be considered a clinical trial intervention, such as drugs or small molecules, compounds, biologics, devices, procedures, surgical techniques, etc. But here are some other examples of an intervention from NIH. We've got eating a certain diet, exercising, a change in daily habits, taking or receiving a drug, reading a book, participating in a new curriculum, trying out a mobile app, playing a video game, stopping smoking, smoking in a lab, completing hand-eye coordination tasks, or completing a priming tasks. These are all considered interventions, even if you've never used the word intervention to describe your work before. So if you're doing an experiment, it's quite possible you're doing an intervention. If you're looking to measure, observe, or describe, it's possible that you're not intervening. So for example, a focus group would not be considered a clinical trial. But again, if it's a manipulation, it's probably an intervention. And this is per NIH. My office isn't actually doing this for kicks. So let's go through, again, we've got these 4 questions from NIH. Let's keep moving through them. Question number 3. So if you've answered yes to, we've got to answer yes to all 4 questions if you're going to be considered a clinical trial. Question 3, is the study designed to evaluate the effect of the intervention on the participants? Most of the time, you're looking at how your intervention affects people. Examples where that might not be the case is if you're just getting people's opinion about the intervention or you're evaluating and refining study procedures. That would be a case where you might not answer yes to this question. And the last question, is the effect that will be evaluated a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome? Did you apply to NIH? Seriously, we were at a conference a couple of months ago, and an NIH representative there said it is going to be highly unlikely that you aren't doing a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome if your funding is from the NIH. So, didn't mean to be terribly facetious there, but NIH, just for examples of what they consider to be a biomedical or behavioral outcome, includes mood management for smokers, reading comprehension, adherence to an exercise routine, quote, a positive or negative change to quality of life, end quote. So again, unless you are asking about preferences, assume it's a health-related outcome. So everyone, take a deep breath with me. You're probably doing an NIH-defined clinical trial, and it's gonna be okay. But let's take a look at these questions in terms of some actual case studies. So our first case study here, we have researchers who are testing how a new curriculum that they've designed affects learning outcomes among children in care centers serving socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. They're particularly interested in how the curriculum can improve student engagement and knowledge retention. All right, let's move through the questions. Does the study involve one or more human subjects? We've got children at the care centers. So the answer to this is yes. Are the participants prospectively assigned to an intervention? Well, the researchers are assigning a new curriculum as part of the research. They're not simply measuring the learning outcomes for a curriculum the child centers are already using as their normal practice. So the answer to this is yes. Is the study designed to evaluate the effect of the intervention on the participants? Indeed, they are looking at how the curriculum changes learning outcomes. So the answer to this is yes. And is the effect that will be evaluated a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome? They're looking at learning engagement and knowledge retention, and those are considered health-related behavioral outcomes. So yes, this is going to be a clinical trial. Let's take another study. Here we have researchers who are following healthy adolescents over time to assess brain development and factors that influence brain development. The participants are administered a battery of standard measures at each visit, including blood draws, surveys, various cognitive performance measures, and brain scans, to assess how the children change on these measurements over time. So here, does the study involve human subjects? Yes, we have those adolescents. Now, are the participants prospectively assigned to an intervention? Well, here the researchers are observing how patterns and associations change over time. They're not actually assigning anything. And they're collecting measurements, but the research is not attempting to modify the brain development, which is to say there is no intervention. So the answer to this is no, which means this is not a clinical trial. And again, that's because of the measurement component here to it. And finally, our last case study, we have researchers who are interested in listening to how listening to certain kinds of music affects cognitive performance. We have 8 to 10 college students who will be listening to 2 hours of classical music during their study visit. And then before and after the listening session, they're going to be administered a battery of standard cognitive performance measures. So human subjects, yep, we've got those 8 to 10 college students. Are the students prospectively assigned to an intervention? In this case, the participants are required to listen to 2 hours of classical music. So yes, they are. Is it evaluating the effect of the intervention? Well, we're looking at how classical music alters cognitive performance. So yes. And is the effect that's being measured a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome? We have the cognitive performance. That's a health-related behavioral outcome. So yes, this is also a clinical trial. So what do you need to do if your study is considered a clinical trial? Well, the first thing is you want to make sure that you're submitting to an FOA that is clinical trial required or clinical trial optional. You don't want to go for the clinical trial not required. Okay, so make sure that you're looking at the right parent announcements there. And if you're not sure, your grants office will be able to help you with that. In Forms E, you're going to need to answer those 4 questions we just went through, and you'll also be filling out an extra section that has to do with clinical trials and disseminating information via clinicaltrials.gov. We have language on our website that can help you with the language that you need for this particular section for clinicaltrials.gov. And we'll be posting that website in just a second. Number 3, all the study staff need to complete good clinical practice or GCP training. If you weren't aware, we do have social behavioral GCP training specifically available in CITI. So you don't necessarily need to take the biomedical GCP courses if those aren't relevant to the work that you're doing. And finally, you're going to need to register on clinicaltrials.gov within 21 days of IRB approval and report your results 12 months after you're done collecting the data. And We have a website for all of this. The quality management team oversees compliance with clinicaltrials.gov, and we have a whole section on our website devoted to this with our own Penn State specific advice and policies, which we recommend you check out before submitting. And that also actually includes that extra section I mentioned. So you'll want to take a look at that website we've got up on the screen as well. Now, clinicaltrials.gov, this is going to be where the most amount of time is required from you as a researcher in terms of these new requirements if you are doing a clinical trial. And we're going to recommend that you consider writing in time for this registration and reporting work, particularly the reporting work, which NIH is estimating at 20 to 40 hours. So it will need to be someone from your study staff as well. This is not an administrative task that we're looking at. So I guess in short, these are indeed potentially burdensome requirements. However, they're not so bad as to avoid NIH funding entirely. You're doing good research, and we want you to have the funding to continue that research. So NIH is really talking about increasing its commitment to transparency, which is why we have these new policies. I don't need to tell you that funding is tight, but think how much worse it would be if NIH lost a chunk of its funding. My personal opinion is that NIH has a sense of self-preservation, but that right now that does translate to more work for you. But again, I don't think it's worth avoiding NIH, nor are you going to be seeing any of this actually changing as we're moving forward. At this time, we don't see any of these requirements getting less strict as we go forward. So we do encourage you to apply for your NIH funding and let us help you where we can in determining whether you meet this new clinical trial requirement. So what do you do if you're not sure whether you're doing a clinical trial? Contact us. We might not be able to give you the answer you're hoping for, which is you're not doing a clinical trial and here's $1 million anyway. But the quality management team is here to help advise, whether you're a PI or a grants administrator. We're also the ones who oversee the compliance, like I mentioned, with clinicaltrials.gov. So you'll be in touch with us once you need to register and report anyhow in the clinicaltrials.gov system. I do want to give the caveat that we are not grant consultants, but we are your clinical trials consultants. And at the College of Medicine, the Research Quality Assurance team can help you. So also a heads up, just in case you aren't familiar, that there is a new NIH single IRB policy that's coming up. And later this year, we'll have a common rule policy from the IRB as well. Again, if you're listening to this in 2018. So just something to keep an eye out for and look at our website for more information. So with that, I want to thank SSRI and CTSI for the opportunity to present this information to you. And again, please contact us if you have any questions. Thanks.